Am I the asshole for me, an off-duty cop, escalating a situation with a motorist? I work as a police officer in a small town. Recently, we've been having issues with people calling the police for non-emergency reasons, so our department put out a notice asking people to only call 911 for actual emergencies. This took place about 3 months ago, but I didn't feel comfortable sharing it due to the possibility of retaliation. So, I was off-duty and in my personal vehicle. Legally, as off-duty police officers, we are allowed to have our service weapon with us so long as it's concealed. I was at a stoplight when I noticed the car next to me had a blown tire. I got out and offered to help, but the driver, who we'll call Karen, refused my help and said she would just call a tow truck. I told her that was probably a good idea and went back to my car. A few minutes later, I noticed that Karen was still sitting in her car on the phone. The light had turned green, so I honked my horn to get her attention and motioned for her to move forward. She started screaming at me that she was on the phone with the police and that I needed to mind my own business. I didn't want to escalate the situation, as I presumed that this girl was on drugs or under some sort of influence. But for some reason, my pride took the better of me and I shouted back, "I am the police officer, so I would suggest you mind your own business." Now, I know that I probably should have just let it go, but something about the way she was talking to me really pissed me off. So, I decided to run her plate and see if she had any warrants or anything. Turns out, she had an outstanding warrant for her arrest for skipping a court date. So, I called dispatch and had them send a unit to arrest her. When the officers got there, she started screaming at them and telling them that I pulled a gun on her. They explained to her I was off duty and not carrying my weapon, but she didn't believe them. Eventually, they were able to calm her down enough to handcuff her and put her in the back of the patrol car. Later that day, I got a call from my chief asking me to come into the station. When I got there, Karen was there with a complaint against me. According to Karen, I had pulled a gun on her and threatened to shoot her if she didn't move her car. I still have no idea where this came from, but it is most likely due to the fact that I'm a police officer. There was a sticker on her car that said, "Defund the police," so I'm assuming that she just doesn't like police officers. Luckily, the dashcam footage from the patrol car proved that I didn't do anything wrong and the case was dropped. However, I was given a written reprimand for escalating the situation and for using profanity. I suppose it's well deserved, but I'm still pretty pissed off about the whole thing. Am I the jerk? I'm gonna be honest. It sounds like you may have let your emotions get the better of you in this situation, which is understandable, to some degree, given the circumstances. Honestly, if it weren't for you being in such a small town, I'm sure this would have made more people in the country mad. As a police officer, it's important to always maintain a professional demeanor and to de-escalate situations whenever possible. In this case, it sounds like you could have handled the situation differently and avoided the whole situation altogether. That being said, it sounds like the other driver, Karen, was the one who really caused the problem here. She was the one who was yelling and screaming, and she was the one who made the false accusation against you. So, while you may have contributed to the situation, it sounds like she was the one who really caused the problem. Nonetheless, it is generally a police officer's job to de-escalate situations. Normal grocery Karen experience becomes an arrest. This took place in the USA in Walmart. Me and my dad were shopping for some school supplies. Then while we were organizing stuff, I realized the new backpack was broken and I couldn't use it, so we had to go back to the store. We head over to customer service. Me and my dad walk up to the customer services to get a refund and a new backpack. Meanwhile, we see a woman yelling about headphones in stock at the employees. My dad knows how Walmart is and just watches, as I put on my headphones and begin to watch some YouTube. Then I see the poor kid just standing there next to his mom waiting for her to stop. I realized that she wanted some sort of headphones, but since they were such an expensive product that Walmart didn't expect a crazy lady to want, so they were out of stock. Back to the story. The lady now throws something at the employees. I think it was a sign or something. And now my dad realizes that this is going to turn into a bad time. So we do the smart thing and start walking away, which the Karen noticed. She now dashes over to me and my dad while we have our backs turned, leaving her kid at customer service too. The lady runs over, and instead of trying to ask me for my headphones, annoy me, or anything that involves talking, she grabs my headphone and in turn, my normal phone. She picks the phone off the floor as my dad just looks in shock. 2 men and 1 woman, all employees, go to chase her down. My dad decides to follow them when the crazy lady is caught. I only hear her screaming, "Ow!" and a lot of swear words. My dad now speeds up because he isn't 60. Why would he think that? When we arrive at the last sight of Karen, there's 1 security guard and 1 male employee who had tackled her. She is screaming to the tip of her lungs capacity. 1 female employee comes up to my dad and asks him if these are his headphones. These headphones were so mangled that the only part you could tell that it was some headphones is the connection thing you put into your phone. Luckily, she gives me my phone and it only has like minimal damage. We decided to leave, but we were key witnesses or something like that, so we had to wait. There, I see the kid just sitting next to his mom being tackled by two men. When the cops arrive, everyone damaged by the lady wants to press charges. She doesn't scream or say anything. She just spits. They put her in handcuffs and put a mask over her face to prevent spit. She knocks that off, and they put one of those spit hoods over her. They take everyone's statements, and it's clear that she is heading over to the plea bargains. Apparently, she didn't hit any employees. She just threw that sign right next to her to show her anger or something. I don't really know what charges she is getting, but I think theft, disturbing the peace, and destruction of personal property. We got like $30 to pay back for the headphones, and that was that. I can't believe that happened to you. I hope that Karen maybe learned her lesson with the cops getting involved. I'm shocked that she was willing to leave her kid behind to try rob a phone and headphones. The chances of her getting away from the employees and your dad were very slim, and I'm glad they were there to help you out in this situation. I feel for her kid. It must be so embarrassing to have a mother like that. I really hope she learns to become a better person. An entitled mother calls the cops after I body slam her son because he hit my autistic brother. Okay, so one day, I took my 10-year-old brother out for the day. Everything was going well until we decided to go get some boba. Now, my brother's autism is a bit severe, and he tends to just randomly scream every now and then. So while we were waiting in line, he did just that and scared this kid in front of us who was with his mom. This made him drop his boba. I tried to apologize on my brother's behalf, explain his condition, and even offered to pay him for another. The mother, though, started lashing out and said some seriously messed up stuff like, "I don't want your money. You should use it for your brother's therapy," and "he deserves to be in a mental hospital." All because her kid, who was actually like 14 or 15, got scared and dropped his boba. I was about to leave with my brother in disgust when this guy takes a swing at my brother and hits him in the chest. I wasn't going to do nothing to that, and I swore he was about to take another swing, but before that, I grabbed him and slammed him on one of the tables. Then the mother started screaming louder than a World War II siren and told people around that I just assaulted her son who apparently had anger issues. When I saw her calling the cops, I just laughed and went to check on my brother who was crying and yelling in pain because nobody ever hit him that hard before. I wasn't worried because the place had cameras and witnesses who clearly saw how demented they were. Fast forward a month, she's now facing a fine of $2,000 and her son was put back on probation. For that kid's safety, I hope I never see him again. Your brother is lucky to have you as a brother. You are a very selfless person and care for your brother a lot. I'm sure your brother appreciates you for it. I understand why you lashed out at the kid who punched your brother, as he definitely deserved it, but the best solution would probably have been to go to the cops yourself and report it to avoid any chance of you getting into trouble yourself. Fortunately, there was CCTV to show how you were acting in self-defense on behalf of your brother, and the right people were punished. Cops' homophobia backfires badly. This story happened back when I was in college. I lived in my state's capital, going to a 4-year university that was named after said state, and living in an apartment. I had no car, but since the campus was just a 20-minute bus ride away, and about 60% of the residents in the 1,000-plus unit complex were students at the college, the buses were fairly constant and convenient. I had a bike, but mostly used the bus, or I walked everywhere. My class schedule was a combination of early evening classes with 1 or 2 early morning classes, depending on the semester. This was common practice, as many students had part-time jobs during the day. I wasn't much different. Between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. Monday through Friday, I had a part-time assistant position at an accountant's office, mostly managing the 30-foot by 50-foot file storeroom they had. Because of the schedule, I often spent my weekends working on homework and projects, and would run errands like grocery shopping when I got out of class at 10 p.m. The city buses stopped at 11 p.m., so usually for errands it was a one-way trip. My roommate and I tried a few different arrangements, but he was absolutely horrible at knowing what to get. After he spent $150 of my money on groceries for the month and came home with $150 in booze, I decided to just handle the grocery shopping myself. This quickly became a routine on Wednesday, because I would spend an extra 30 minutes after lecture looking over the professor's notes. This was for applied physics, and every little detail was helpful, so most of the students that were of the same major did the same. I would take the bus to a local competitor to Walmart, which was open 24 hours, do my shopping, then make the 3-mile walk home around 11:30 while carrying groceries. Along the way, there wasn't much, just a few car dealerships, some apartments, and a few bars. It's at these bars that I would typically stop. They were about 2 miles into the trip, and oftentimes I would go in and get a drink. Since I was 18, I was allowed inside the bar, but could not purchase alcohol. Fine with me. They had sodas too. After making this trip a few times, I started to pick up a specific bar to stop at, because the guys there were nice, no one messed with my groceries, and honestly, I wasn't objecting to the view. You see, the bar was a gay biker/leather bar. Yes, I'm gay. Whatever. The bar was set up with an open courtyard in the front, with a large awning that opened the courtyard to the street and a great view of the river across the street. They had these thick plastic curtains that could be pulled across to cover the bar's interior during the weather, for events, or the day. However, with the heat, the curtains were wide open and fans were blowing non-stop to keep the space from becoming a sauna. On the night in question, it was a real horrendously warm and muggy May night. The kind of night where it feels like you're breathing water instead of air. I stopped at the bar and ordered my usual root beer. The bartender popped an IBC open for me, and I slowly drank it, letting myself cool down from the heat. I ordered 2 more and hung around almost 30 minutes, chatting with 2 guys inside the bar. It was Wednesday night and the bar was pretty dead, with only 6 or 7 customers besides myself and the bartender. One of the guys I was talking to was fairly straightforward, but I turned him down. It was already late for me and I had class at 7 a.m. Plus I could tell he had been drinking fairly heavily, not something I find particularly attractive. I exit the bar with my 4 paper bags of groceries and start to walk down the street. I make it about 50 feet before I see bright red and blue lights around me and a police cruiser whoops at me. I stop and turn around. A police officer exits the car and asks me what is in the bags. I tell him just groceries and offer to show him the receipt. The police officer snatches the receipt from my hands, looks it over with his flashlight, then puts it in his pocket. I politely ask for it back and explain I need it to settle up the grocery bill with my roommate. He says it is evidence and then demands to inspect my groceries. I'm starting to get exasperated, but I set my bags down and allow him to look through them. I don't have anything perishable and everything is either in a cardboard box or a plastic bag. The officer rifles through the bags, taking everything out and setting it on the sidewalk. At first, I thought he was just counting each item to match the receipt. When he has the last few boxes, he pulls out a pocket knife and uses it to rip open a box of rice. "Hey, what are you doing?" I shout loudly. The police officer replies with the most matter-of-fact tone I've ever heard. "I'm searching for them drugs." I stood there blinking for half a minute while he proceeded to destroy the 5 boxes of rice, some mac and cheese boxes, and a bag of beans before saying, "Why would you think there are drugs in sealed boxes of food?" The police officer ignores me, so I take out my phone and start taking pictures. He hears the shutter sound and demands I hand over my phone. I reply with, "Nope, I'm recording a crime, destruction of personal property." The police officer loses it. "Give me the phone, F-word." He charges at me, grabs my shoulders, swings me around and shoves me down on the hood of his car, sending my phone skittering into the street. He then proceeds to announce that I'm under arrest for transporting drugs and that he's going to find the evidence wherever I have it hidden. F-word. He then proceeds to pull my pants down, underwear and all. The next few actions happened so fast. My left elbow rocketed backwards, smashing into his nose and shattering it. I then pull my pants up in time to turn and see him at his feet and pulling his gun. I reach out, grab his wrist mid-draw, pull his arm down and lunge behind him. His arm violently snaps and he lets go of the gun. I then hurl it into the river. I turn around to see him screaming into his radio, calling for backup to deal with a bloody tweaker. I walked over to my phone, picked it up, and called 911. 911 operator. 911, please state the nature of your emergency. Me. I've just been sexually assaulted by a cop, driving unit while at 1234 street name. He's calling for backup on his radio. I broke his shoulder while escaping his assault. He ripped down my pants in the middle of the street after destroying my personal property, which I have pictures of him destroying. His gun is now in the river. I know this call is being recorded so it can be used in court, which it will be. Do you understand? The 911 operator is silent for 10 to 12 seconds, which I use to allow myself a few breaths. I understand, sir. Our protocol is to dispatch the officer sergeant to the scene. Do you have his badge number or name? I replied that I did not. However, there was another police car 4 to 5 blocks down the street, and with what little time was left, I wasn't going to get closer. I told her to send whomever was the most senior police official on duty at the time, and that I was going to call a lawyer. I then hung up right as the second police car arrived, and a mid-50s-something officer with a stereotypical police mustache got out and pulled his gun, telling me to freeze. I had already set the phone to auto-dial, so I raised my hands to show I was unarmed, and then the officer lowered his gun and began to approach. Before he did, the phone was answered and I put it on speaker. Me. It's Luke. I'm at 1234 street name. I've just called to request the police chief to my location because an officer has sexually assaulted me. By now, the second police officer is within 5 feet of me and his face turns as white as a sheet when he hears the voice that came out of my phone. I want that officer's name and badge number, and I want you to put him on the phone. I'm also on my way. The voice is clipped and very official, despite being well past midnight. I hand the phone to the police officer in front of me and motion for him to hand it to the first police officer. The second officer brings the phone to the first officer without question. The first is leaning against his cruiser, moaning about his arm and nose, and answers the phone with, "Who is this?" The voice on the phone calmly explains, This is District Attorney Her Name. What is your name and badge number? See, my grandfather was the chief of police for the city I grew up in, only 30 miles from the city I was in now, and he had held regular events with everyone within law enforcement for the local departments. Everyone loved and respected him, and he reciprocated by being a mentor to many of them, all of whom called him by his nickname Muzz. One of them was a young ADA for the county, who is now the city's DA. She actually lived only a few properties away from my grandfather and was a regular fixture at family events. By now, 2 more police cars are coming down the street, and the second officer is starting to look like he's going to mess his pants. Meanwhile, the first officer is explaining everything to the DA, who calmly listened to everything, then instructed them to stay there until she arrived. She ended the call with, "And anyone who touches Muzz's grandson before I get there won't have a job anymore." I stood there for around 30 minutes while the police talked amongst each other about what had happened, and took statements from the bartender and patrons of the bar. It turns out, they saw the whole thing. The chief of police arrived in his own vehicle, and he started to talk to the first officer, who was sitting in an ambulance. Moments later, the DA arrived. I grew up with this woman. She knew me, and I knew her. She took one look at the boxes of destroyed groceries on the ground in front of me, then marched up to the chief and demanded to know what search had been authorized. She had a look on her face that would have made a grizzly bear back down. The chief tried to explain that the officer had believed I had drugs in my possession and was searching my persons for them. She listened to this, then pointed to the police cruiser. "Let's see what the dash cam shows." Turns out, the cruiser had a 4-way dash cam, giving it a nearly 300-degree view of the vehicle's surroundings. It showed the cops staking out the bar for over 2 hours before I had arrived, immediately pulling up to me as I exited, and the whole search. The chief tries to explain that the officer had gotten tips about drug dealing at this bar, and that he often sees illicit activities there. When the camera showed the officer pull my pants down, she said, "That is sexual assault. I don't care if it is supposed to be a search, which was conducted improperly and extremely inappropriately. The officer is in the wrong. Anything done after the fact is self-defense." The chief tries to explain that the officer will be disciplined, but that my actions were excessive. He says the EMT thinks the officer's arm is broken and his shoulder is dislocated. She, however, replies with, "I don't care." She then turns around on her heel and approaches me. "Are you okay?" I replied that I was fine, just tired and pissed that this guy would attack me. I asked why, and she said, "Let's ask him." We walk up to the officer, still in the ambulance, and I said, "I wasn't doing anything wrong. You saw the receipt. I was only carrying groceries." He clearly looks like he's been given some pain meds because his face looks like he's about to giggle. But my question makes him look me straight in the face, and he says, "It's obvious you're a F-word. I've seen you go into that place." He almost spat this word. "With bags. You aren't very good at hiding what you're doing. That place only survives on party drugs, and I know they're dealing. You were just the obvious person to be taking the drugs to the school." I just looked at him stunned and turned to walk back to my groceries and pack them into their bags. The DA then offered to drive me home. Along the way, she asked me, almost as a formality, if I wanted to press charges. I said I did and asked her what I should do. She advised me that she would press charges against the officer on behalf of the county for the illegal search and the assault. I thanked her, and she said she would make it hurt. It turns out the bartender had recorded the whole thing on his smartphone, and he turned that over to the DA as well. Combined with the dash cam and the fact the whole search was completely founded in the officer's homophobic beliefs, the DA destroyed him in court, where he tried to fight that it was a legitimate search for drugs. The judge did not buy it, and neither did the police union, whom dropped his legal counsel after the first part of the proceedings. In the end, he settled for 5 years in prison, rather than risk a trial he would undoubtedly lose. The day after his sentencing, however, his reality got even worse. See, the state I lived in had been working on an anti-discrimination law, which included protections for gays and lesbians, and adopted it while he was on trial. Under the new law, automatic civil action was to be taken against him by the city because he had committed a crime on a discriminatory act while acting on behalf of the city. The city did file the suit, and guess who was there to meet him in the courtroom the day after he was sentenced? You guessed it, my grandfather's friend, the DA. I was sitting next to her as she watched him enter, and her face turned into the Cheshire. I still remember how he looked oh so scared to see her again. Once again, she destroyed him in court. The hearing was a massacre for any defense the officer could have made, and before the judge even got to see the footage from both the recordings, the officer's lawyer proposed a deal for a $40,000 punitive payment, plus legal fees and damages, and settled the case. I didn't care too much about the damages, as I would only get the cost of the destroyed groceries back, unless I filed my own civil suit. But I did make an arrangement with the DA to send a photo album of me spending the $25 in damages for the destroyed groceries on buying identical replacements, just so he would know that I had, in fact, purchased them at a grocery store. I even got the store clerk at the checkout to pose with me as she rung them up when I told her the story. I'm really glad you didn't let this guy off the hook. You made the right choice by pressing charges, otherwise there was no chance that homophobic officer was going to change. I'm sorry you got let down by the people who are supposed to be protecting you. On the other hand, you're very lucky you had connects through your grandfather. This turned out to help a bunch. Hopefully, the officer can sort himself and his thoughts out during his time locked up. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Check out the other videos on your screen right now. Otherwise, you're definitely the jerk.